Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Podcasts in One Day. Thank you so much if you've come back for this special podcast. I have a wonderful guest for today, and I think you're really going to enjoy today's chat. Remember to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe button, please. So today I have a special guest, Catherin Skinner. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Catherin now. And I came across Catherin's video on TikTok through her royal family videos into my algorithm, and I love them. If you follow me on Instagram, I've been posting them. So Catherin is a feminist coach and author. Her work focuses on the power of women and how we can dismantle structural inequality. And she is trained in psychological medicine. She works as a director in the violence against women and girls sector, and she has done for over 15 years. And she has a new book, The Control Delusion, and it's the blueprint for taking down patriarchy. And it's due for release next year. So, I mean, if you look at all of those points, especially, working with women and how we can dismantle structural inequality, definitely speaks to a lot of the conversations that we have here about the royal family. So without further ado, Catherin, I'm going to add you to the stage. Do you want to say hi to the Duchess of Success squad? Oh, maybe unmute yourself. There we go. I think we can hear you now. I can hear tapping, but I'm not sure I can hear you. Let's try that again. Hi, everyone. If you're just filing in, do hit that thumbs up button and subscribe button, please. Just wait for Catherin as she sorts out her mic. By the way, do make sure to go and watch the podcast that we had earlier today. We talked all about... Catherin is saying that she can't hear anything. Just give us a sec, folks. See, are you wearing your mic or headphones? I could hear you earlier. So let's try that again. Maybe try unmuting your mic.
Right, I can hear you.
Ah, fantastic. There we go.
Sorry, I don't know what happened there.
No worries. All right, technical glitches sorted. Catherin, if
Yes.
you please introduce yourself to the Sussex squad, our little community here in the corner of the internet.
No problem. Thanks so much for having me. Yes, I'm Catherin Skinner, and I am a feminist coach and author. I work with women to really kind of unpack what's going on at a deeper level around the barriers we face that are caused by patriarchy. And so this topic and looking at, your podcast and what you talk about, it really resonates with me, which we'll get into later. But at the moment, I'm working on a book which is called The Control Delusion, and it's really all about understanding what's going on beneath the surface. What are these power structures in place that are impacting on our lives so much? And what I found is that the more I look into it, the more I research, the more I find themes around things like monarchy, like what is going on in terms of power structures. The idea about how in the US they've just elected a king. All of this is coming together at once. And so my purpose at the moment is this intersection of all of these things coming together. And my background is that I've worked in the violence against women and girls sector for about 15 years. I did that at a strategic level. So I've got the background of understanding, front line, what are the real sort of significant, challenging barriers that women face, especially from an intersectional perspective, and what that means to women who are not white, women whose immigration status is insecure, women who have a disability, and also women who are LGBTQ+. So there is so much going on around sort of challenges that we face. And my perspective is that the only way we can meet them head on is to really unpack the structural barriers that we face. And the links there are around, like, well, patriarchy, but how does that manifest? And so that's where we've kind of, you know, interloped, where some of the stuff that I've been talking about recently is relevant to what's going on in your world as well.
Absolutely, because you know the monarchy is part of the power structure in our country, and another reason I wanted to actually talk to you is because you are from the United Kingdom, and a lot of the other guests I have on, they're from the United States, and I think they've been following this whole royal family saga, but I feel like there's still not that deep understanding that we have, because this is something that we have literally grown up with. So before I think we get on to the wonderful topics that we're going to cover today, I think I always like to go a little back in time and ask my guests, what has monarchy meant to you as a young person, and then now as a grown adult? How has your perspectives of the monarchy changed? And, you know, were there any particular points where your perspective changed? Like, for example, when, you know, Diana died, what does what has monarchy meant to you in the past, and what does it mean to you now?
It's so interesting, and you know, you and I have touched on this a little bit before, and you know, I was sort of reflecting on how if you're an adult aged under 73 in this country, then you've always had, your idea is a female monarch. So we've always had this sort of matriarch, that the Queen has been there as a sort of like stalwart for years and years. And she sort of created this image of sort of regalness, but distance. She was very much about distance. And you know, full disclosure, I'm from kind of like feminist background. My mum is a feminist. My family's still quite left leaning. There wasn't a lot of love for the royal family growing up, but you know, I recognise that most people don't really think about it like that. They don't. They have quite a lot of affection for the royal family. But you know, the thing is, when you look at some of the actions that Queen Elizabeth II took throughout her time as monarch, I was recently I mean, this predates when I was born. I'm going to talk about 1938, but there is the famous story of Edward VIII and how he had very dubious connections and his loyalties were kind of questioned during the Second World War. And the kind of common narrative is that Elizabeth was responsible for challenging him about that, sending him packing, and really kind of taking the moral line. That's not really the case. That's not really what's happening. Elizabeth was really looking at what she could do to protect the survival of the royal family, and that's really been their MO. That's what they've been about. They're looking at how they can protect their wealth and status. So really her role was damage limitation, and that's what she was trying to do. She was trying to keep that hidden from the British public. Then when you come on to scenarios like during my lifetime and you look at Diana, that's a really pivotal one. So from my point of view, I would say that I had a sort of affection for Diana. Like, I've always been sort of anti-monarchist, but Diana was doing things, like she was involved in charitable ventures and organizations that were about looking at, well, what is going on for real people. She worked with the LGBT plus community. She worked in places like India. She was drawing attention to what was going on, to topics that weren't very interesting.
HIV crisis and
exactly. She was a real big patron.
HIV crisis, landmines.
Yeah, absolutely. The Terence Higgins Trust. You know, she was somebody who was prepared to stick her neck out, really. And I think the point where, when she died, and the response from the palace was just distance. Again, you know, that's the brand. It was distancing. That was a really kind of crisis point, and that showed a lot about the psychology of what monarchy was trying to do. It was not caring about people. It was caring about the optics. It was caring about the image. And so that was quite a pivotal moment for me. I went actually to Hyde Park not for the funeral, but for people kind of gathering, and we saw it on the big screen, and I went with my family, and it was like, it was a message to say, we see, We see you,
Yes.
we see what you're
Yes.
doing, but also we see the people behind it. And it was a sort of
Mm.
show of support on that. And, you know, I've always kind of felt that seeing William and Harry in that was always really sad. I've always had a bit of
Yeah.
affection for Harry in that, of a child going through that kind of trauma. But
Yeah.
these are the sorts of things that were becoming more and more obvious to me growing up
Yeah.
at the time I did. I grew up in the 80s, so like sort of west of London, and I was also growing up in a really multicultural society. So then you also see the influence of Commonwealth, you see the influence of
Yeah.
empire and what that means and the relationship that that has in terms of
Mm.
society at large. So there are all of these themes going on, which for a lot of us, they're kind of part and parcel of life. We sort of look at them and think, okay, you know, this is how
Mm.
things work. A lot of people don't question it, but actually when you stop and you
Mm.
look at what's going on, what are the power structures here, how far back do they go, what are the roots of them,
Yeah.
then it becomes a bit more concerning. And that's why, fast forward to today, I mean, there's lots, I mean, I've only touched on a couple of things, but fast forward to today and you see all of the
Yeah.
scrutiny now arising about public funds and what that looks like. And you've got to
Yeah.
ask, why is this only being questioned now? Is the bar so low that we have
Mm.
to wait for this type of serious public scandal where we're talking about somebody who has
Yes.
engaged in highly criminal behavior,
Yeah.
is our friend, that this is where we are that now. Only when
Yeah.
somebody is linked to Epstein, only when somebody is seen for the person that they are themselves, let alone his connections, do we say, hang on a minute,
Yeah.
what, how is this person living in this huge lodge in the middle of Windsor Great Park? He's left it to rack and ruin for 20 years and nobody bothered to ask. That seems problematic.
Yeah. And I, and I think, but I feel like it's partly just because the royal family is so culturally, you know, it's so embedded in our
Oh
culture
yeah,
and our
absolutely.
and our identity as British people, and I
Mm,
feel like that has actually only started to chip away since the Queen passed away, just because she was such the cornerstone and
mm,
the image that
yeah,
and the image that she created, and this mystery, but
yes.
that dazzle does not seem to have reflected on her long-term intern Charles, and we
Mm,
and with all of the other mistakes that the royals have made, and not seeming to kind of modernize in the way that perhaps other royal families in Europe have, in a way that
yes.
makes them a little bit more tolerable. And we
Mm,
just have this, you know, great great big disaster that I think, by no fault of her own, I think was fueled by Meghan coming into the royal family, because in so many other aspects, race,
mm,
classism, xenophobia, all of
yeah.
that then came into the forefront as well, in a way that maybe they wouldn't have, say, if you know, Harry hadn't had married a biracial woman.
Mm, mm.
um
I think
so
it brought all of it to the surface.
yeah.
It really amplified their disconnect with people, with
Mm,
people, normal everyday people. I mean, I know we're talking about Meghan as like a film star, that she's somebody that was well known already, but
mm.
even more so then. So what's the problem? So what's the
Yeah.
problem? If she's already kind of working, operating at a level that you would assume, you would appear to think, well, that's good, you know, that works because this is a high
Mm,
profile, successful woman, you know, she's hardworking, she does all these things. What's the problem? And that
mm.
shows the disconnect. That shows where
Yeah.
these sorts of comments start coming out, or this sort of mentality.
Mm,
I think it really speaks to the, they're not just sort of like out of time with people. They're really out of touch with people. I mean, you
yeah.
talk about when I was growing up. I just yesterday I was doing a bit on looking at the public funding stuff around properties, and I was doing
Yeah.
a bit of digging, and then I was like, so Prince Philip. So I was looking at the Duke of Edinburgh is now Prince Edward, and then
Yes.
so it used to be Prince Philip, and I was like, gosh, like all the stuff Prince Philip used to do, and I was looking through all of the things that he would used to say, and I'm
Yeah.
not going to repeat them, but my goodness, like, is it a surprise really that this
Yeah.
family with a patriarch, let's not make a mistake, there's a patriarch there, that was Philip, that he would have this sort of attitude to people of being less than, being othered, really sort of heavy stereotypes of people. That's how he saw the world, you know.
Yeah.
And so that's the family that we're talking about. And so when I look to people like Andrew, and I've also been trying to look at stuff like, because my background is in psychological medicine, what's the pathology there? What's the pathology for somebody like Andrew? Well, I mean, his father was a infamous, I mean, like, I don't want to be too crass, but infamous racist and misogynist, let's be honest, the sorts of things that he would come out with. This is the family that we're talking about. These are highly questionable characters who are having access to huge amounts of public funding. And it needs to be questioned, because this is, I think you're right. I think the relationship with Meghan, or lack of relationship with her, absolutely emphasised the way in which that they don't relate to people. They just don't.
Do you think that this is actually the first time that people are looking at the individual members of the royal family and then looking separately at the institution? Because I think what's kind of happened is that the institution of the monarchy is attached to our identity, and so because of that, there's this always defending of the individual members of the royal family, whether that's Andrew, whether that's the Queen, even though she's done horrible things, whether that's Philip, and he's said or done questionable things. So it's like maybe for the first time people are actually looking at the individual members of the royal family and the institution as separate entities. And now that they're looking at the individual members of the royal family, what we're seeing is emotionally arrested, dysfunctional people, and it all
That's a kind way of putting it.
It all just seems rather ridiculous that we're all just sitting here bigging them up. And perhaps if they were actually rather nice people and actually fit the Disney fairy tale of princes and princesses that we actually grow up reading, perhaps we wouldn't think so much of it. But it's just so obvious that they're just really not nice people.
Yeah, well, it's like you can't look away. You can't look away at this point. And the whole timeline of how long it took for Charles to strip Andrew of his titles, and how long it took to really kind of get serious with him about, should you be living in this palace? Let's be honest, like, people call it a lodge. I think it's really misleading. You look at his lodges,
it's a whole estate.
It's like Downton Abbey. It's huge. And he's just been left rattling around in it with Fergie for the last 20 years. And people are like, oh, and he was still living with Fergie. Okay, I thought they were divorced. It's like, nobody's been paying attention. And what's really, and I have to, we have to mention, and you already put a picture up of her, we have to mention Virginia Giuffre in all of this, because the only reason that we can't look away, the only reason that this has come out is because of the bravery of a girl from Florida who is prepared to tell her story. And she has taken down a prince from beyond the grave. Like, literally, that's what's happened. And so that shows the power of voice. That shows the power of a woman telling the truth. And let's not forget that the settlement that was paid out by Andrew in court was provided by Queen Elizabeth, who has been able to, for a very long time, throughout her reign, has been able to work in a way which is damage limitation, which is perceived as being acceptable. And that's where they've really kind of been operating in plain sight for so long. Like, I go back to the example of Edward VIII, and it's because I did a reel recently which kind of picked up a lot of interest around this, and I had always sort of thought, okay, background, Edward VIII, mates with Hitler, doesn't become king because he marries an American divorcee. Oh, the scandal of him doing that. No, that's not the full picture. The full picture was his questionable connections and his threat to bringing down the monarchy by his behavior. It was by his behavior. And the Queen was active in trying to keep what were the Marburg files at the time, which is the equivalent of the Epstein files in a way. This was the documentation that showed the behaviours that Edward was, I almost said Andrew, there's too many narcissists, that Edward engaged in himself that was the problem. It's not just by association. It's not just that he was friends with Hitler. It's not just that Andrew was friends with Epstein. These are people who are engaging in criminality themselves. And it's got to that point, to what you were originally saying, it's got to that point where we can't look away. And Charles has only taken action because of Virginia Giuffre. That's the only reason why.
Yeah, and it's been very surface level action as well, because even this whole thing about taking away the titles. Okay, you can take away the titles, and now we're all calling him Andrew Mountbatten Windsor instead of Prince Andrew, but he still has the privileges and protections, though that hasn't been taken away at all. So really, what has actually happened in the way of accountability? Okay, he's out of Royal Lodge. They're going to put him in another estate, and they will. And I'm so sure that Charles will still be funding him in the back.
Well, this is it, and that's the question. Like, so it's almost like, oh, but look, we've taken all these titles away, but then there always seems to be another one. But actually, he's going to be staying in Royal Lodge until at least February. That he wants to stay for Christmas. But what's the question about? Well, what sort of money is he going to receive? You know, what's happening with that? He's apparently not going to receive. So he would have got about £500,000 for putting in an early notice, but he's not going to get that because he's left the place in such a state of disrepair. And this really speaks to the mentality of it, like the entitlement of that. So you've lived in this palace for so long, and you are just kind of leaving it to rack and ruin, and you don't take any responsibility for it either. So it's very performative, like you say. It's very much Charles doing what the public expect, really, at the last minute. But having said that, when it was announced that he was being stripped of his title of prince, I did feel that that was a victory. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that. You know, that's a significant milestone. It's important, but it doesn't tell the full story, and it's not accountability. It doesn't take us to a place of accountability. In my view, this man should be in prison, and I don't think I'm alone in that. I think that it's highly likely that he has committed these crimes that have been alleged against him, and that the very least is that he doesn't receive any sort of protection from the royal family, but also no more public funds. And that's the difficult part to really get to. That's what we need to see. We need to see transparency and clarity on that, because he should not be receiving public funds at all.
No, and on that, let's talk about royal money, because I've heard about 100 different explanations as to how the sovereign grant's meant to work, as to how the duchy's meant to work, and there's I still don't understand it. I just think there's so much mystery and lack of transparency around royal money, where it goes, who gets what, how it gets spent, and what gets invested, and where does that go? Is it going into bank accounts here in the United Kingdom? What assets is it going to? Is it going to, I don't know how many tax havens the United Kingdom has, a lot of them in former colonies. Like, what is happening with the royal money? There's no clarity, in my eyes anyway, about it at all.
Absolutely. And I think that's intentional. That's intentional. They make it so opaque in terms of what's going on. Oh, it's far too complicated. It's gone on for such a long time. Oh, it works in this certain way. But the reality of it is that, there isn't enough public scrutiny or accountability of it. So the Public Accounts Committee actually looked at this about 10 years ago, and that was chaired by Margaret Hodge. And they did have, sorry, excuse me, I just need to take a little drink. I'm getting too into more detail.
Go for it.
So that meant that they did start to look at how the royal family were spending their money. But what they found was that they were overspending, and they found that they weren't they weren't accruing their reserves. They weren't really thinking about what they could do to operate in a way. If they're going to be treated as some sort of corporation, they're actually operating in a really kind of unsuccessful model because they are just overspending. And one of the key things that's come out recently is that they've had an increase on the sovereign grant to pay for all the maintenance work. So let's just put this into context. So 10 years ago, the Public Accounts Committee were saying that royal family were overspending, the Treasury weren't keeping a close enough eye on it, and they were letting properties fall into disrepair. 10 years later, we see that Andrew has been living in a property which he has left to fall into disrepair. So there's been no kind of focus on that in the meantime. And you've got to think about the timeline around, 2011. That's when Andrew and Epstein were photographed in the park. This isn't a kind of out of the blue scenario. There have been warning signs there all along around this individual, but then you look to the wider picture and you have to say, well, why? You have to ask the question, why? This is serious. We're talking about public funds, and we're talking about public funds also, let's not forget, in an age of austerity.
Yes.
The public purse has been dealt with by different governments over the last 10, 15 years, but austerity has been hitting all of us across society. I mean, unless you're in the top 1%. But you've got to kind of add that up and say, well, if we're at a point in time where the cost of living crisis is really hitting people, and we can see this, also people see this sort of gross level of wealth from the billionaires and the oligarchs, what is happening to really hold people to account? That's what people care about now more than ever. But we've had faith in public institutions like the Treasury, for example, like governments, to actually look at this. And I think now I think there's an assumption that people have thought, I'm sure that's being looked after.
Properly. And that's just not the case.
And it's not the case. And that's part of like my wider message in general is just look beyond the surface, look deeper, because very often what is convenient for structural power to kind of project is easy to kind of just smooth things over, but it's not in our best interests.
No, but it is, and thank you for those points, but it's just so powerful still, even now. I remember the day after the Trump banquet, going into work, and the first thing somebody asked me, bearing in mind this person didn't actually know at the time that I have a royal podcast. I kept it very quiet. Because I was pretty sure that they were very much for monarchy. But the first thing they said to me was, "Oh my God, did you see Catherine's dress?" And in my mind, I went, "Yeah, I did see her £5,000 dress that my taxpayer money paid for." I did see it indeed. I have no thoughts about it, but I saw it. And it's like people are still very much dazzled. And I'm just like, it's like you're salivating for these people, but you're not allowed to sit on the table and eat the food.
Yes.
I just don't understand it.
Yeah, but I think it is what, part of what we're talking about, of how entrenched it is, and that people just don't question it, because I think it's about having trust in the system. I think it's about having trust in feeling that things are really kind of working in a way where people are held to account in some form or another. And I think if you press people a little bit and you ask the question, then they sort of they couch it in terms of, but it's because it's wider than that, it's more complicated than that. I don't fully understand how it works. It reminds me of, do you remember when Marcus Rashford was campaigning against food poverty in 2020?
Oh yes, and he was trying to get food for the kids.
trying to get food for the kids. He's also come from a background where he understands food poverty, and he's just saying, look, let's reorganize our priorities. Let's make sure these children get fed. And I remember distinctly, like, the response that he got from people in government or people in the Tory party at the time. It was the response was, you don't understand how it works.
Yeah.
And that really struck me, because that line has been rolled out so often against that. And it's quite often, if you sort of look back through biographies of people in history who stood up to power and said, why can't we just have equality? Like, why can't we just end food poverty? Why can't we just do these things? They will always say it's too complicated for you to understand. They will always say that.
And it's
not
actually just it's a low key way of saying, like, you're really stupid.
Yeah, because it's the idea that it's fundamentally the idea that these people are in power because they are and wealthy and successful because they're intelligent. That is a really sort of fundamental idea that people have held for a long time, and particularly in this country, the monarchy is at the apex of that. It makes you believe that they go to the top schools, they do, you know, they are engaging with the higher echelons. Michelle Obama was like the classic person in the right place at the right time to say they are no smarter than you. They are no more erudite, no more educated, no more
I remember when she said that.
deserving. They are no more deserving. And that is the kind of, that's the major crack in this illusion. And I do feel that people are starting to see that more and more. They're not believing it, because if you look at examples of those people, we can see that they are not deserving. We can see that they are not any more intelligent or clued up. They are grifters. Honestly, that's the mentality of it. Is short-term gain, and it doesn't mean that it will last forever. I think that's a really important point, because people think that it's gone on for so long. This is just the natural order of things. It's not. It's not. I mean, we'll get into it more, but patriarchy is not really, it's not been around forever. It's only really kind of come around, it's really kind of got into it about the last 500-600 years for a variety of reasons. But monarchy has been front and center.
Yes, of that. But just before we transition into that, I just wanted to read some of your comments. R.R. Carter, 2:35 a.m. in the USA, and you are here. You see how dedicated the Sussex squad is, Catherin? They are dedicated.
Oh my God.
Here it's 2:35 a.m. in California. Margaret, Helen, you said, sorry, Margaret Hodge, although not a Republican, is a critic of the firm's finances. She has called for greater transparency, accountability, and tax fairness. Indeed. Slick, you said, examine the media's role in this mythology of monarchy at 100%, and we will talk about the media and the British tabloids later on, because what is painted as frankly non-existent. The royal family are simply high-paid bunch of actors and actresses living out this myth. Indeed. And I guess that, you know, you when you create a mythology and a fairy tale around something, it's very easy for people to buy into it. But it's usually when you have parts of society breaking down, when that starts to, you know, kind of go all over the place. And correct me if I'm wrong, Catherin, but wasn't it when Charles II was in power, that was the reason he was beheaded? Wasn't it because of food riots or inflation?
So Charles I was executed in 1649, and really, to cut a long story short on him, it was because he believed that he was chosen by God to rule, and that created civil war. And so the outcome to that was to get rid of him and to bring a kind of final point, an end point to the monarchy. And that's what is reflected in France in particular, that they ended the monarchy, their monarchy, in a similar way. But only in the UK would, for 10 years of having, so yes, it was, Cromwell came in after and took in a very sort of puritanical approach to government. And then he died and his son was inadequate. So rather than thinking, well, maybe we need to have an election or do something democratic. They just thought, let's just get Charles II back, because that was such a good idea. And it's kind of, it's one of those moments in history where you just, I just find it so bizarre, because it is one of those points where things could have been so different.
So different, right?
If only things had been different. But no, it was because there were a group, in my opinion, it was because there were a group of kind of clueless men at the top who didn't have the imagination to get together and come up with an alternative. And you know, if you look back through history of where things went one way and they could have gone another, I think that's a good summary of where it's all gone wrong.
Yeah. And that's pretty much where we are now, right? So with that,
yeah,
you know, let's touch on some of your points. You know, the link between monarchy and patriarchy and the power structure that we're in, and you know, what does it even mean to be a constitutional monarchy in 2025 going into 2026?
Absolutely. And this is a big topic. This is something that I've got into really looking at the research from writing my book, which is really kind of trying to work out what we're up against, right? What we're up against in terms of patriarchy and how it manifests in our day to day and what we can do about it. And so it meant kind of going back to the historical roots of it. And, you know, I'm going to try and keep this brief, but
I mean, on it, there is so much we could talk about. I mean, I don't even
we could talk about.
We haven't even like touched on colonialism, but I think that would probably be a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you kind of look at it, so there's often this idea that patriarchy was born with monotheism, which is the idea of there being one God. And so the major religions, with you know, having an idea of one God, meant that the narrative on divine feminine was rewritten, and that's very prevalent in indigenous communities, in religions that predate monotheism. So it's more about equality and everybody bringing something to the table. So that's kind of the first part to it. There is a link with monotheism, but I would still argue that really patriarchy has kind of become more of a manifestation over the last 500-600 years. So we look at how you've got to look at things like the witch trials in Europe, the purges, the way in which monarchy, and that's almost sort of you know, another way of saying the elite, but it really is about people who were born into power. Okay, so it was about people in power, males in power, deciding how they would keep the population in line, how they would maintain the population, and they would do that through fear and punishment, which is where you get the witch trials, purges, etc. Then we move into an era of the transatlantic slave trade, where it's the same principle, but it is being brought out across the world. So it is expansion. It's the period of expansion and really treating people like commodities, but worse than that, it's this element of genocide, which we see with Christopher Columbus coming to America in 1492. But, you know, alongside, so after that, then we look at what that means in terms of colonialism and imperialism. And I kind of refer to India as a case study on this, because I think it's a really critical one. You look at India, where it was in, say, the 17th century, it was a powerhouse in the world on silk trade. It was at the forefront of areas like mathematics, science, and even surgery. And then we have the Trojan horse of the British Empire inserting trade through the East India Company into India, where it becomes this process of infiltration over time. And that is a kind of not too distant memory of it's an example of people today like Boris saying, look how wonderful India was because of all the railways. That's an example of really kind of plundering the natural resources and the people by creating infrastructure. That's the example. So that was all of that all of that kind of history that we're talking about, that has been propelled by monarchy. It's the power at the top engaging in a very short term plunder and gain expedition. And so then we see all of the community implications of that over time, and what that's meant for countries like the UK, where empire then became Commonwealth. And after the Second World War, people from across the Commonwealth were asked to come and live in the UK to essentially rebuild after the Second World War.
Like Windrush generation.
Absolutely, the Windrush generation. But you also have a huge population come from India and South Asia, who are at the forefront of areas like engineering and electronics. And so we have a situation where monarchy, empire, patriarchy, those power structures in the background have been having these impacts at a global level for people in our lives across the world over time. And what remains in those power moves has been the same, whether it's the witch trials, whether it's slavery, whether it's colonialism. It's power, it's plunder and gain. It is looking at the short term, and it has disrupted the idea of what community looks like. And when you look at functioning communities that embrace ideas like equality, everybody has something to bring, individualism, where it doesn't matter if you are gay or straight or whatever your background is, you are respected and you have something to bring. Those communities are very much sort of tantamount to indigenous communities from Africa, communities across Asia who quite often had very similar outlooks in terms of a collectiveness, and not this idea of short-term plunder and gain, which is
and hierarchy.
And hierarchy. It's all about hierarchy and embedding that. And so the UK has been at the centre of all of this. But it's also quite interesting when you look at the relationship between the UK and America and the timeline there around the idea of men in power, men at the top. The president in America is, it's a democratic process, but there still hasn't been a female president. And that is not an accident. And that's the point. It's not by accident. It's also not a kind of natural way of organizing society. It's just not, because it doesn't make sense in terms of a long game. It makes sense in terms of short-term acquisition. It doesn't make sense in terms of communities being able to come together and support each other and move forward as a society. And I think what we're seeing now is the cracks of that starting to emerge, that this sort of model of patriarchy is actually not sustainable, because it's put all of the oligarchs and the billionaires at the top.
And we're exhausted.
We are, but we also can see them now. We see them for what they are. So, I talk about the example of somebody like Edward VIII. This is not new. It's not new that we've had people who are essentially narcissistic psychopaths, who are not particularly intelligent, in positions of wealth and status. But it's not been questioned because there's an idea that in some way they're deserving of it. And it's not true. And I think that's the point is, it's questioning it. Just because things are the way they are, it doesn't mean they always have been. And it doesn't mean that they work. And I think that's the important point. You have to look at what's going on around the origins of things like colonialism in particular. It's really important because it wasn't about progress. It wasn't about moving communities forward. It was about really, the case study of India is it was a major grift. It was a con. And India is now a powerhouse because it showed resilience after the British Empire left in 1947. And that's a good example of patriarchy disrupting and then actually resilience coming back.
Yeah. And I mean, there are many countries in the Commonwealth now that are actually looking to looking to leave.
Mm,
I think the Bahamas, Jamaica, and there has been talk in the past in New Zealand, even in Australia. I think Mark Turnbull, even though he was more conservative leaning, he did talk about that. And more
yeah.
recently, when Charles went to Quebec, in Canada,
Mm,
they basically just turned their back on him. I think one of the officials was like, "Why would I show up for a speech to listen to Charles?" And
mm,
Charles is ill. um,
mm,
yeah, I don't. Well, within our lifetime, William will be king,
mm,
and so with him basically as the head of the Commonwealth, I
mm,
just don't see that that is an institution that is going to be around for much longer, especially if one of the big what I call the big three leave, Canada, New Zealand, or Australia. I think the others will
mm.
probably, follow after them.
Yeah. It's interesting as well, I think, the link between Indigenous communities and their rejection of the Commonwealth, because that is a really clear example of colonialism, imperialism. It's an invasion. It's it's an uninvited disruption of people's communities. And I
But it
think
was
that's a
actually,
really,
sorry, just to
go, sorry, go on.
interject there.
Yeah.
It was actually meant to be a rebranding, though, wasn't it? The Commonwealth.
It was, absolutely. I mean, I sort of talk about it like Empire Light, but
Yeah.
it was this idea that it's sort of classic monarchy patriarchy. It's like, we've come here and essentially subjugated you. We've brought genocide and poverty and disease, and you don't want us to stay anymore. Okay, right. So we'll go, because you have been able to get rid of us. Fine. But now, how about you join this fun new club where you get to have some sort of link to being like coming and living here and working here, but you don't get full status of citizenship necessarily. You're just part of the
Yeah.
wider, community of empire. And it's so typical. It's so just like you went across to different countries and you caused all of this damage, and then eventually it all dried up and it was all disastrous, and then you left, and then that was your response. It's like this rebrand. It's always the
Yeah.
same. And I think that it was trying to it's classic because it's a Windrush generation saying you can come here and work and we'll provide all these things for you. But then it's such, I think the Windrush scandal is one of the huge ones, because people coming
Yes.
from different parts of the world to rebuild a country which was in ruins, a lot of the male population were dead, so their labor force were not around, trying to bring people to come. The NHS is a product of
Oh
multiculturalism.
yes,
It's because that
absolutely.
that
Like
that's just what
half.
it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I
so
mean,
to sort of couch it in that way, like, we'll do you a favor if you come here, and then 60, 70 years later to tell people that they don't actually have citizenship. That's the ultimate example of what we're talking about, and that comes from monarchy.
yes. 100%. And
It's awful.
it's interesting. I don't think William and Kate have done an international trip since their disastrous trip in Jamaica. I don't know if you saw the pictures
I
of,
didn't know.
William. Oh yeah, there were these rather interesting we had a great laugh on the podcast, of William and Kate wearing like the old colonial garb. You had Kate in this kind of like lady antebellum kind of dress, William
Right.
in the old style colonial like military looking get up, and they were
Mm.
riding around in a jeep, and it's like somebody on their team
Oh my god.
honestly decided we were going to do like colonial throwback, and it was just insane. you also had you also had the most terrible optics where they had gone, I think, to see, they were walking past like children at a football match, but the children were behind this metal gate, so it looked like they
Oh
were
my
reaching their
god.
hands through a cage to shake the children's hands. There was just so many things that happened. It was a disastrous trip. I mean, even
Oh.
people even people that are usually a little bit more pro monarchy
Mm.
in the press were like, no, this looks really, really
Wow.
bad. And they
Yeah.
haven't done an international trip since. And it seems like they're really scaling back. I mean, they've been sending the minor royals to do some international stuff, but then it's like that
Yeah.
doesn't really register or hit the news. And the whole point of, you know, I think the Queen used to say you have to be seen to be believed. And it's not just here in the United Kingdom, it's, you know, also abroad. And, you know, do those kind of trips even have a place in
Absolutely.
society
Yeah.
anymore, or at least in the way that the royal family does it? Because Harry and Meghan have done a few trips, but they've actually been invited by the countries, and they've also, you know, bought some things anywhere they go. So for example, you know, Harry and Meghan went to Nigeria, and then Harry, through the Invictus Foundation, they're actually building I think it's what is it, like a recovery center for wounded soldiers. And that's the type of thing that you don't typically see when a royal goes on tour. They don't really come with anything other than themselves, and they usually invite themselves as well.
Right. Yeah. I think that is so telling, isn't it? You know, William and Kate are supposed to be the kind of rebrand generation for the monarchy, and then they do something like that. And you think, when they are in the middle of this sort of situation, it doesn't seem to occur to anyone to say, actually, this seems a little bit inappropriate.
Might not be a great idea to roll around in a Jeep, old school colonial style.
Yeah, but that just shows the disconnect, doesn't it? It's just like, what planet are they on that they think this is okay? But then maybe that's the kind of natural progression of things. It's the kind of it's showing up as who they are. And you know, you give the example of how Harry and Meghan contribute, and you know, they're very often engaged in community projects and things like that. You know, that's like Diana. That's the same sort of approach. It's like, how can I help? That's the difference. How can I help, rather than, how would you like to see me in this lovely dress?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I didn't tell you. Oh God, I think the biggest laugh we've ever had on this podcast. So Sophie and Edward went to, I can't remember where it was they'd gone exactly, somewhere in the Caribbean. And the gift that they bought the official that they were meeting was a picture of themselves. And you could just see the look on the official's face. And I'm like, who thought that would be a good idea? I mean, not even some English tea, some shortbread would have been great. Like, no, here's a picture of us. It was insane.
That's just, you know, isn't that what everyone does when they go? You go around to someone's house, you bring a picture of yourself. I mean, obviously, that is what people want. It's bizarre. It's really bizarre. But that shows the kind of mentality of what we're dealing with. Yeah. And so I think that they're really kind of on a natural trajectory in a lot of ways. But I don't mean to say that in terms of let's be complacent. I really think that there's such an important point in history here where they are held accountable and they are scrutinized in terms of how they are living, how they get public funds. You know, actually, I was looking at Edward and Sophie, where they live, and they live in Surrey Lodge. I get so lost in all the lodges and houses. Surrey Lodge, which is a 120 room house, and they are, you know, it's like, why are they living somewhere like that? That's the Crown. I think that's the Crown estate property. But also, it's, you know, things have moved on. So that generation of Anne, Andrew, Edward, why, you know, when you get to a point where Charles is now king, can't they take more of a back seat? Because the heirs are going to be through William and then Harry. So why do we need to still be bestowing all this public funds on people who, okay, during the 80s, they were the Queen's children, but surely they shouldn't be accessing the same level of public funds and
Yeah.
properties and all these things that they've
Yes.
always had. People should be questioning that. It's almost like,
Yeah.
well, when Charles became king, maybe there should have been some sort of audit about who is doing what now and who wants to take a back seat,
Yeah.
you know, like they have done in places like Sweden and Norway. I mean,
Yes.
it's just such an obvious thing to do. And that shows more awareness about the public,
Yeah.
you know, about the zeitgeist, what is going on in the ether. There's an awareness there.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to like have a look at this, guys, because people are starting to ask questions, and maybe this
Yeah.
doesn't look good anymore. I mean, it's just having some self-awareness, and that's the difference. That's what we don't see with the
Yeah.
royal family here at all.
No, and you know, in no way do I say this to defend any of the individual members of the royal family, because it's also just the amount of money that they're given. But one thing we do know, and this is something that Harry has spoken on, is the way in which the institution actually goes out of their way to keep them dependent, that it has almost this cult-like mentality. And there are members of the royal family, like I think Edward at one point tried to start a production company or something like that, and they, you know, it seems like even when one of them does try to do something decent, it's like there's this internal sabotage that happens. And then I think that's also what also plays into that is the jealousy and the hierarchy, and you know, nobody can outdo you know whoever's higher up. So there are ways in which the institution keeps everybody, you know, infantilized and locked in. There's so much dysfunction between them that if you don't even sort that out, you can't even get to the bigger issues, like, you know, finances and stuff like that.
No, there's a psychological element to it, definitely. As you're talking, it reminded me of, if you've seen The Godfather, the part where
No.
Al Pacino's character is like one of he's kind of he's meant to be the patriarch as he takes over, and in the second one he says, every time I try to get out they pull me back in. And it's that same
Yeah.
mentality. It's that kind of, and that's quite revealing about the psychology that we're dealing with here, because that suggests a joint enterprise. That's the mentality of
Yeah.
what's going on. It's a joint enterprise, and everybody has to be playing the same game. Everybody has to be adhering to the. It's not a rule book, but it is a kind of a code that they all have to make sure that they are
Yes.
doing that. That they are
Be
also
following.
towing the line, and that they're doing what is expected of them. But I have to say, you know, where they are trying to do things where perhaps they're following some sort of personal enterprise and it doesn't work out. I mean, there's not a lot of empathy or sympathy where people are forced to live on benefits. And very often the approach from government is work harder, try harder, do more. And these people are living off public funds. And when they try to do something different and it fails and they get sympathy, it's more like, well, I mean, and I think in a lot of ways, Harry and Meghan are examples of just like perseverance of it, that they've made a clear distinction, they've drawn a line, and they are trying to do something different. And that is quite important in terms of setting a precedent as well.
Indeed, and just before we actually get on to Harry and Meghan, I just wanted to kind of wrap up this last point that we've been talking about. You know, recent events and scandals, and you know, whether it's Andrew or whether it's, you know, William and properties on the duchy having mold on them, and things like that. You know, what does that tell us about like where we are now?
I think that it's a low bar. This is the point. Like, it's a low bar that we have to wait for somebody like Andrew in the position that he's in to be found out in this way, and it's happened in slow motion. You know, I think that's the other thing, that it's been in the public awareness for 14 years. I mean, those pictures of him and Epstein were taken in 2011. It's been known that the Queen's son, if we look at it in context, it's been known that the Queen's son has had connections to one of the world's most prolific offenders, for about 14 years. There have also been allegations made against him by Virginia Giuffre to suggest that the type of behavior he's engaged in is highly criminal. Like the offences that she talks about are some of the worst offences that you could imagine. Alongside that, Andrew has also been embroiled in the Chinese spy scandal, where he's trying to insert himself into positions of status, authority, a sense of being involved in politics and also involved in money, following the money. This is somebody who, the bar is so low on this one that he should have been scrutinized long ago. For Charles to have stripped him of his titles in 2025, for how long was it since Virginia died? Was it April? So about 6 months later. It's not good enough. And I think people see that it's not good enough, and people are pretty disgusted by it. But what it's done is it's opened up more talking points around, well, how did we get here? What are all the other things that have happened? And so that's where, I come back to examples like Edward VIII, because there are a lot of parallels between somebody like Edward VIII, not just with his connections, but his own behaviors in terms of questions about whether he was even working with Germany or what his allegiances were that were a risk. They're a risk to national security. And the thing about that story is that it's been rebranded and sanitized by the Netflix series The Crown. So now the public narrative is that the Queen was the hero, he was the villain. She chucked him out because she found out that he'd been in contact with Germany, and everybody knew he went to the Berghof in 1937 and had lots of pictures taken with Hitler. The point is that these people shouldn't have to create some sort of national scandal for us to say, well, hold on, where does their money come from? Where are they living? What are they? But also more than that, the question of what do they contribute? Because that's the really kind of key question that we need to ask here. It's that they are receiving public funds, but what are they for? And people will always say, oh, because everybody loves the royal family, and everybody comes to the UK, they love Windsor Castle and they love Buckingham Palace. Let me tell you something. Paris is the most visited, the biggest tourist attraction in the world. And we're not gonna we don't have to compare what happened to their royal family, okay? So it's not really got anything to do with that. It's about history and culture, and people it's we really need to question, what do they bring, more than how are they funded? What is their purpose? What is the point?
And on that point that you just said, if more of the royal estate started just going into disarray, if more of them were opened, they'd be able to fund themselves. I mean, Buckingham Palace, I think we've spent almost something like £390 million, and that's just a conservative estimate on renovating it. The Queen moved out of that property some time ago. I think they were getting increasingly nervous about protests. So they moved her, and nobody else has moved in there since. I think they do maintain some staff offices there, but the other royals don't live there. And something like Buckingham Palace, my God, civil ceremonies, a tea house, whatever else you want to put in there. There's almost 300 rooms. You could do tours, and the same for all of the other royal estates that often actually sit on grounds that could just be open up to the public, and they could pay for themselves. They could even create jobs like other countries in Europe. I mean, I went to Denmark. I visited many of their castles while I was there. And so I just feel like there's so many things that could have been changed at this point. And I actually think that we're just at a point of no return. Not just because I think the image of the monarchy and the individual members of the royal family is so tarnished now, but because it's just so obvious that inside of the institution there is no will to change. And nowhere has this become more obvious than when Meghan entered the royal family. So let's get into that.
Yes.
Now
Okay. Where do you want to start?
yeah. Well, I'll start when I actually started paying attention. I was actually a little bit late to the party. I at that point I didn't have this podcast. When Harry and Meghan first started dating, to be honest, I wasn't really paying that much attention. What got me, and the first thing that I saw that made me go, the British tabloids are at it again. The British media's at it again, was when I saw a BBC skit, and it was Kate and Meghan, these like caricatures. Meghan, she's biracial, but she's very light skinned. Her character was much darker than Meghan in real life. And the whole skit was about, Meghan knifing Kate. And I felt that was so odd for such a skit to be on the BBC. And I thought, what is this about? And that was the first time that I then started kind of digging around the internet, and I came across the Sussex Squad, which is a Sussex Squad podcast, which is one of the OGs in our space, no longer running. But they were kind of the first to jump on talking about the way that the media was treating Meghan.
Right.
And then there were all these things like the infamous, I'll put it on the screen, the headline straight out of Compton in the Daily Fail, basically trying to link Meghan and, to a gang-ridden place, and also just, I mean, just looking down on people that come from those places is just horrible. It doesn't make you any lesser of a person, but just their attempt to link her to that, when actually she is very much, your Cali, Los Angeles girl. Didn't grow up in Compton. And then there were also things like, oh gosh, I have to dig into my memory. I think there was an article. Oh, Boris Johnson's sister. She wrote a quite controversial article where she referred to Meghan as, exotic, or adding exotic blood to the royal family. I think there was another commentator that, specifically pointed out Doria's dreadlocks. And then there was Sarah Vine. I don't know if you saw this, when Harry and Meghan announced their engagement. She wrote an article with the headline in the Daily Mail, "I have a niggling feeling about Harry and Meghan's engagement." Yes. That was actually a headline in the Daily Fail by Sarah Vine, who was still married to Michael Gove at the time. And so, and then so this is where I started to go, they're at it again. It's the Diana playbook. They clearly have an issue with Meghan being in this institution, whether it's her race, the fact that she's American, the fact that she has a Black mother, the fact that she's self-made, and we can talk about this in regards to patriarchy as well, that she actually came into this family a millionaire. Very accomplished, very educated, already an actress. She'd lived a full life. She traveled. She had a passport. Apparently, at one point, she had a passport taken away from her while she was still in the firm.
Crazy.
And the way in which they completely disregarded her mental health. Where, she talked about her suicidal of herself. The parallels there.
Yes. I mean, I think it's really interesting, the point that you make about how you weren't really bothered about this whole scenario, like you weren't really following it. And it's almost like sometimes you feel like, well, you came for me. Like you've started this because you are criticizing somebody on their identity. And so where does that come from? Why is this such a problem? It's like, that's what really kind of brings things to the surface. So similarly, in terms of how Diana was doing things that were community-based, and she was doing stuff that could have got her into trouble at the time in a lot of ways, that was a problem. And so when she died, what brought it to the surface was the silence. So the dehumanization of her, the lack of any empathy towards her. And you can see the parallels of how they treated her in the run up to her death as well, in terms of really it's about bullying. I think we just have to say it
Yes.
how it is. It's about bullying. But
Yeah.
what is clear with Meghan is the racial aspect to it, which is there's a root of that in terms of how the royal family have treated her. Because, I mean, I often say when you want to understand a kind of perpetrator behavior, which is what this is, you just need to look at what they are doing alongside what people say. Because very often, if Meghan's saying she felt bullied and suicidal, I mean, I can totally believe that. They have done the same thing to Diana. They have a complete disconnect from normal people. We talk about, well, Harry's grandfather would say the most awful things to people in public, which I can't even repeat 30 years later. That's the mentality of this family. And he was alive when Meghan was part of the picture. So you can imagine, I think he even said something to her, didn't he? So this is the mentality of what we're talking about. It's not so, like with Andrew, you want to understand the perpetrator, you see what he does. It makes sense that what people are saying about them, it adds up because they are showing us who they are. They consistently show us who they are all the time. We can see the way that they operate, and it's totally in line with what people are saying. So that just in itself shows the mentality. But it's also to the wider point about the Daily Fail. And, it's hard because, you see things like that from the Daily Mail. I don't know how they've heard of Straight Outta Compton. How do they even know about it? I mean, that's like, they're just trying to reference things in a way that they just don't get it. They're just disconnected. But you expect it from the Daily Fail. But when it comes to people like the BBC, like to your point earlier, that's quite often the point where I go, hang on a minute, this is the BBC again. Well, this is taxpayer funded. This is BBC licensed territory here. I'm not comfortable with this. And also, I really sort of stopped following the BBC. Like, I get my sources from across the board because, like everyone does now, you don't just like watch the news like everybody did in the 80s. But I have sort of stopped paying attention so much to the BBC because when he died, Duke of Edinburgh, when he died, the kind of the way that he was talked about, it really made me sick because he was talked about like the backbone to the Queen, that he was so supportive throughout her whole life. He was her confidant, he was a hero, he did all these wonderful things. And it's like, no, you're talking about the racist dude from the 80s that would always say horrible things.
He was actually just a sugar baby.
Yeah.
Literally.
But that was his problem. That was his problem. So when he decided, like when the Queen chose, well, she put it through Parliament, I think it was in 1960, that they would be Windsor Mountbatten because the house name for her was Windsor and his was Mountbatten. He famously said that he was something like an amoeba because he's the only man in the country that would have his wife's name before his. That's the mentality of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
This is it. And so for the BBC to talk about, like, everybody knows that. Everybody knows that was what he was about. He spent his whole life being resentful that he was playing second fiddle to the Queen. He hated it. And so for the BBC to say that, I just thought there's a generation of people who might actually believe you. There might be the generation that comes after me might believe that Prince Philip was a supportive, loving husband to the Queen and that he did everything to make her life better. I cannot accept that in any reality. So I have a problem with how you are going to frame anything else. If you're going to say that, I'm not sure I can trust you, to be honest.
Also with the BBC, I don't know if you saw this, but during the Queen's funeral, there were several moments where there were protesters or there was booing, partly because Andrew was allowed to partake in some of the processions. And what basically happened was when you saw the live feed, you could hear the protesters and you could hear the booing. Now, when you saw the replay, they actually dubbed the sound.
Right.
And so there was censorship in terms of that as well. But there's a very good points made. But just to bring it back to Harry and Meghan, sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, like the way that the media have just been. I mean, the British tabloids are awful. Period.
Mm.
You know, Murdoch, Piers Morgan, phone hacking. But there's just something with Meghan that is just it's just beyond anything that I think I've ever seen outside of
Yeah.
Diana.
Yeah.
Outside of
Yeah.
Diana, actually,
Yeah.
it's just so deranged.
But it sort of it tracks with the narrative from the British tabloid press, from the media. We see an uptick in racism. We see the rise of Nigel Farage. I'm sorry to say, but we do.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
we also see Union Jacks and St. George's flags in our communities popping up. And it is scary. Honestly, I find it really scary. And that's the symptom of it. That's what we're talking about. The riots in August 2024, they were so real, like they were so frightening. And if you didn't live in areas affected, or if you didn't live in the UK, you might have looked at that and thought that was kind of a bit of that was a bit of a blip, or that was something
yeah.
unusual. That just seems like a one-off thing. No,
Mm,
people in our communities are afraid, and
yeah.
it's
And
because
it's symptoms of something else.
it is symptoms of
Yeah,
something else, and that's the worry.
yeah,
We've seen the rise of MAGA in the United
yeah,
States, and the relationship between the UK and the US, culturally, historically, economically, it's so intertwined. It's talked about
yeah,
as a special relationship, but there is a
yeah,
significant shared history there. And so
yeah,
very often it's easy in this country for us to say, well, Trump's been elected in America. Thank goodness we
mm,
don't have him here. But at the same
right.
time, we have a prime
It's,
minister who's a Labour prime minister go to the US and invite him round
yeah,
to visit the king for tea. The optics, the
yes.
imagery of that is so blatant at this
And
point that you can't make it
and
up.
yeah, and on that, like when you then think of the actually glad you mentioned Nigel Farage, because Nigel Farage was at the forefront of Brexit. And I feel like
Mm,
Meghan actually came into the picture around that time when things
mm,
started to get very hostile. And there's a
yeah.
term that Sophia Noble, she's a specialist in the United States. I think she works around AI or AI algorithms and bias and stuff like that. But she
Mhm.
used a very interesting term, symbolic annihilation, and
Mm,
and and
okay.
and and this idea of when you have someone at the forefront of media, as Meghan has been, and then you
Mm,
have all of these cultural things happening around Brexit, MAGA, rise of fascism, and then you have
mm,
someone like Meghan who comes to the forefront. She's a feminist, she's a woman who
yeah.
was independent, and now she's going into this institution that represents what it does. There's
Mm,
this the way she described it was like the whole of the institution and the media ganged up to destroy her as a symbol against the backdrop of what we're seeing, MAGA,
mm,
Brexit, and all of that stuff. And I feel like Meghan got caught in the crosshairs of that. And it's not even necessarily about her as a person, it's what she represents that needs to be destroyed.
mm, absolutely. And I think that, that's really stark. But I think it's also, as you were talking, it reminded me of how there is this sort of reaction to African American women.
Mhm.
There is something about that. Look at what happened to Michelle Obama.
Yeah.
Think about also how, this is going to be me kind of going on a tirade here about the power of African American women, but it's true.
Mm.
So if you think about some of the most when I talk to my clients about who is it that you most respect, who is it that is your kind of your icon of resilience, it's very often Maya Angelou. And if you think about women who have really kind of gone down in history as being heroic, you think of Rosa Parks, you think of Harriet Tubman, I think of people like Angela Davis. And so that's not by accident. These women have been through not just sexism, but they've been through discrimination at levels which are inconceivable to most people. I mean, especially if you look at somebody like Maya Angelou and what she went through, but her voice was her power. And her voice was so powerful that Donald Trump had to have all of her books removed from the Naval Academy in Washington, I think it was. It's not an accident. It's not an accident that they're afraid of African American women, because it's very often, when it comes to the struggle, it's very often women, and it's usually women of color who are the ones who are at the forefront. That's the symbol that scares them, and they know it. You know, I've worked in the nonprofit sector for a long time. We're majority women and majority not white. That's not an accident. That's not an accident, because women who are of color are forced to face not just sexism, but discrimination in levels that make them even more resilient. And I think, you know, there is a part of it which is like Meghan was caught up in the crosshairs of it, but Meghan has a voice, and Meghan has always talked about what is important to her. That in itself is an act of radicalism as far as they're concerned. But to a modern audience, it's like Meghan is just being herself. You know, I think that actually sometimes the most radical thing you can do is to be yourself, because it shows that you're not going to subscribe, you're not going to go along with what they expect. She was not going to do a Stepford wife act. She was not going to do that. She was going to do how can I help? That's what she was going to do. That's what it comes down to. How can I help?
I mean,
That's what we see.
she wasn't going to do that, and that's not the type of woman that Harry wanted. He didn't want a Stepford wife.
No, and he grew up watching Diana.
Yeah.
He grew up watching someone who she was prepared to step away from the marriage as well. I mean, we haven't talked about the Martin Bashir interview. I think you've done that separately anyway. It's a whole other entity, but you know, she was in trouble for her voice, and that's a really important thing for us to remember. But this is where it shows up as the fight against patriarchy. See what happens when you use a voice. See what happens, because usually there will be a man or somebody, maybe a woman, maybe 1 in 10 is what I find, is a woman with internalized patriarchy, but they will always say, you don't know what you're talking about.
Oh yeah, I mean, Meghan, you want to talk about internalized patriarchy, internalized misogyny. Some of Meghan's biggest haters are women.
Yeah.
And I've seen it being in this space for so long. You know, the Sarah Vines of the world, the Daily Fail lot, and I think she triggers people just for so many reasons. And I think that, you know, both Harry and Meghan together, I think one of the biggest risks they actually pose to the institution is they're, first of all, now earning their own money through, you know, commercial ventures, and also doing charitable ventures, using their own private money, but also, you know, finding rich donors. So they're doing basically the work that the royal family say that they do without the, you know, public purse. So just very much frightens them, because people have now started to ask, well, then if Harry and Meghan can go off and do that, then why do we need to give you lot so much money?
Absolutely. It just draws it to its kind of obvious conclusion. What is the point? What do they bring? What are they contributing? And they're not. They're just not. And I think that Meghan and Harry have shown that it's possible, and that's where it becomes problematic for the royal family.
Very much. And you know, it's interesting. Harry, if you hear him talking in interviews, he's still very much a monarchist. He actually still very much believes that monarchy has a place, granted it needs to change. And I'll never forget, there was an interview that he did. It was Harry and Meghan and young people who, it was like the representatives, young people representatives of the Commonwealth or something like that. This was during COVID, so they had it over Zoom. And Harry said, you know, we do need to have difficult conversations about the past. He used those
Right.
words. And then the
Yeah.
very next day, in all of the tabloids, Harry's disrespecting the Queen, Harry's disrespecting Britain. And I'm just like, I think he also brought up in another interview, I think with who was it now, something Anderson Cooper, and he talked
Right.
about, I think it was the Dutch royal family. They are paying a massive fund to one of their former colonies, I think to the tune of something like 200 million pounds or something like that. And you know,
Right.
Harry brought this up also. And again, when
Right.
he brought that up, the whole idea of, you know, paying back former colonies and stuff, it, you know, they twisted it with, oh, you know, Harry doesn't like Britain, Harry's disrespecting Britain. It's like every time he tries to have this conversation, they spin it into something else.
It's like, oh, look over there, there's a squirrel. It's that kind of, don't pay attention to what he's saying. He's crazy. Like he's turning into a radicalist, and it's just so, what he's saying is so obvious.
Yeah, and the thing is, and the thing is, to be honest, I would even say that Harry isn't even radical enough.
No,
You know,
absolutely not. I mean, he can't be, in fairness to him, he
yeah,
can't be radical enough about it. No, definitely not. But the point I'm making about, oh, look over there, it's a squirrel, is really about how he's talking about he's talking about money. He's talking about
yeah,
money, and that's what people freak out about. Oh no, well, if he starts talking about that, well, where does it end? It's a
yeah,
disaster,
that's
and
it.
it's
They want to
what
nip it
what
in the
was.
bud.
They want to nip it in the bud. It's accountability. Start talking about accountability, then it's all deflected back to that other person. It's all, oh, that's too much, that's going too far, that's too radical. And really, it's not. We need to start having these conversations. We really do, because how can we move forward and come up with a plan for what we want society to look like if we can't recognize where we've come from, what's happened? You know,
Yes.
that's why there's such a push to look at areas in our schools, talk about history and remember empire. Just as I said that, you brought up that picture. That was brilliant timing. Empire. Like how it all comes back to what that meant.
Oh,
And
let me tell you. Sorry to interrupt you, Catherin, but let
God.
me tell you, Charles's coronation is the most fun we've ever had on this podcast.
I think I was busy. I don't remember what happened.
I
Why? What
mean,
happened?
it was the everything of it. I mean, the everything of it,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
pomp, the pageantry. I was quite surprised that they actually, you know, decided to go for the full Monty. You had
Oh.
you had Charles having a tantrum because, you know, the fountain pen couldn't work, and
Oh.
all of these ridiculous things. But go on.
They just can't help themselves, though, can they? It's like that trip to Jamaica where it's like, did anybody think at this age of austerity and the cost of living, what we really want to see is a man in his 70s dressed in regalia having a tantrum over a fountain pen? That's what people want to see. Anyway, back to the point about history. I'd almost made the point. It was really simply that we need to be clear about what's going on here. And the only
Yeah.
way we can do that is to actually look at how did we get here? And I don't feel like enough people are asking those questions. And that's really the fundamental point, is that there's too much acceptance that systems are working the way they are, as if that is a product of progress. And it's not. It has definitely evolved over time in many areas around complacency. And I think that the royal family and their relationship to monarchy and their relationship to patriarchy are a really clear example of that, which is coming to the surface now in the form of a kind of almost like a constitutional crisis for them. That I call it, I hate saying it's a scandal around Andrew. It makes it sound lighter than it is. But all of the facts that have come out around Andrew have brought this to the fore, because it's a question of public funding should not be used to support the lifestyle of somebody who's a criminal.
Yes.
But more than that, public funding should not be used to support people who do not contribute anything
To society. Yeah. Yeah.
And if somebody, people always say, oh, you don't understand that, they bring this and that, they contribute so much. What do they take for anything that they contribute? Anything that they do
Yeah.
appear to contribute, that we don't have clarity on what they take, and that's not by accident. So we have to
No.
ask why.
Yeah.
We really do.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. Can I just say before we go further, thank you so much to Ara Carter for the coffees. Thank you so much to Rebecca for the coffees. And so glad that you're enjoying our little chat. Just the next thing, just as we start to wrap up and wind down, I wanted to ask you the role of media with the royal family and the relationship that the media has with the royal family. It's very, very messy. Because on the
Mm,
one hand, you've got these royal reporters who are part of this, press pack that are basically there to produce propaganda to prop up the royal family, but they also know all their secrets. And so when they want something from the royal family, they can, basically just blackmail them to like pull strings. But then sometimes they
mm,
do also have to toe the line. And so there's this weird dynamic between the press and the royals. And so everything that we know of the royals that gets put out, for the most part, is through a filter.
mm,
And we've seen in the last, well, when Meghan came in, you had,
mm,
for example, the rumors that started flying around about William and an alleged affair. And then all of a sudden that all went silent and disappeared, and then it was just like Meghan getting thrown to the wolves.
mm,
And that media landscape that has been created is, it shocks me how much people still actually buy into the tabloids, like the Daily Mail, Jonathan Rothermere,
mm,
the Sun,
mm,
Rupert Murdoch, and just the chokehold that the tabloids have had over
mm,
people's minds, but especially in regards to the royal family and what we do know and what we don't know, what gets hidden, if
mm,
scandals do come out, how they get written about, um, and how do you think there's any hope? The point I'm trying to get to in terms of
mm,
press reform, because there's really no checks and balances for the press. We
mm,
had Leveson 1 inquiry, Leveson 2
mm,
got cancelled. I think they
mhm,
started Ipso, which is basically the foxes running the hen house. They give,
mm,
if someone in the media does something wrong, Ipso just
mm,
gives them a slap on the wrist because Ipso is the media. And it's like we had
mm,
all that Leveson stuff going on, and nothing really came of that. No accountability really came of that. I know that there are attempts. There's like the groups like Hacked Off that are trying to solve this problem, but I do also think that if we never have a fully free, unbiased press, I don't think we're ever really
mm,
going to have true accountability when it comes to royal family. I think that the only accountability that I've seen in my lifetime that comes when it comes to royal family is if there's salacious scandal, and then we can fill it
mm,
up in all of the gossip rag
mm,
mags. That's the only like type of accountability you ever seem to get, but
mm.
not true journalism. Very, very rarely.
Yeah. I think that it's so interesting when you look at the psychology of, like, the structure of it. So if you're talking about Fox News and the tabloids, you've got Rupert Murdoch at the helm of all of that.
Hmm.
He is at the apex of that brand of media. Um,
Mm,
but you also have organizations like the BBC, who we've kind of referred to in terms of they're supposed to
mm,
be this sort of unbiased, trusted, public funded, beyond reproach way of
yeah.
getting the news. And I talked about my take on that with Philip dying and their rebranding of that, but it's also, it's wider than that in terms of scandals that come out with the BBC and how they're operating and all this kind of thing. But what's really interesting to that, and I also would kind of want to make the point that that is powerful, that is really damaging, but also that there are kind of demographics, sections of society, people who will only get their news from one source. Do you
Yes.
get people who will just, they just have Fox News on in the background all day, and it's also almost by osmosis that that's what they get. You have people from maybe like my parents' generation, where, like I said, we grew up where you get the news from the BBC when you had the news on. So they would get all of their news from basically the BBC and maybe like one left-leaning paper. There is a huge rise in independent media. And this is this is this platform. This is ordinary people having conversations which are gaining traction and saying, hang on a minute, what's going on here? Trump becoming president in the US is one of the most fun, the damage that this is doing globally and societally, and it's heartbreaking. We see it all the time. This has been huge and disastrous in so many ways. I talk about that as a feminist, but also in terms of economics, equality, social justice, everything. But the response to that has been that people are gaining traction, platforms. Independent media is growing in a way where I'm more interested in looking on YouTube or listening to podcasts to see, what is this person's take on this? What about this other person? I want to hear a female take on what is going on with this. I'm going to go and have a look at that. That is growing and that is powerful. And there is a potential there that's almost like a kind of grassroots response. That's the kind of, we're not just taking this for granted anymore. We're not just going to believe what you're telling us. It may be that there's a kind of age demographic to that, but there are always going to be people in whatever generation who are just a bit more intellectually curious, who are just going to want to find out things for themselves. And really, at this point in time, I think that's become a really kind of, it's like a watershed moment where that is coming together, where people are not just accepting what they're being told. It's much easier for us to do the research and find out for ourselves. It's much easier for us to access alternative voices that we can relate to, who are not just wealthy white men on TV. Okay, we're not, that's not what I'm interested in. That's not the take that I'm interested in. It's getting our facts from independent media alongside the mainstream, because that is our own way of being able to say, look, what is actually going on here? We need to find out more about what's beneath the surface. And so I have hope in that, because it feels so kind of it feels so overwhelming. The media is just this huge economic powerhouse, but there is a lot of power coming through from independent media, which is an alternative to what we're being fed.
100%. And I don't know if you know this, but the British tabloids have actually come after Sussex Squad and our platforms. At one point, actually, when the space started taking off, they said that we were Russian bots and trolls. There was there were articles about this, calling us Russian bots and trolls, that we were being paid by Harry and Meghan. I have never contacted anybody on Harry and Meghan's team, never spoken to anyone on their team, and nobody else I know in this space has either. And because I think also for us, we're just Harry and Meghan fans. We're not monarchists. And I do think that the press were just surprised. I don't think they expected us to push back. I don't think they expected any pushback, because they've never had any pushback. They've just reigned supreme, especially the British tabloids, if you think back to the Diana years. But I think they didn't realize how much social media would make a difference. And I guess, yes, I think you're right. I think that's also part of the pushback, all these independent, not just myself. I mean, I don't even have the biggest platform in the space. There are people who are much bigger than me, and I think perhaps as we continue to voice our opinions, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's on the TikTok streets, so that we can add our voices to the mix. I did have one last question that a squaddy did have for you, but before I do ask that question, was there anything else that you wanted to mention regarding, the royals and where you think we're going?
I think the only other point I wanted to touch on was, which we have touched on a little bit, was really looking to what they've done in places like Denmark and Sweden, and looking at it in a way which would be a lot more, I don't know what the word is, but just sensible, practical. I think there's an argument that when Meghan and Harry made the decision that they did to step back, that everybody after that should be, I mean, either there needs to be scrutiny in what happens with their public funds. But I think there's an argument there that after that line, this is where the royal family actually decides to downsize. I think that they should have done that at the time. And I also think that they need to think seriously about reorganizing themselves. I mean, I am an anti-monarchist. I don't believe in monarchy. I don't think there should be a monarchy. But I think that at this point, they really need to take seriously the crisis situation that they are in, but also think more about how can they contribute and how can they be more transparent, because they are not. And I think that's where we need to really apply the pressure, is on public funding and making that more transparent. There's no reason not to. And I think that's the main call to action on what we need to see from government stepping up. What we need to see in terms of any sort of systemic change is to get transparency on their public funds and also their properties, which is part of the bigger picture. They haven't cared for them. We knew this 10 years ago, that they had let lots of Crown Estate properties fall into disrepair. And Andrew's upcoming departure has proven that there's such bad dilapidations that he won't. It's like the equivalent of not getting your deposit back because you trashed your flat. That's what he's done. So it shows the lack of care. It's like a kind of analogy for the lack of care that they've shown to society, to their privilege. They haven't taken care of it, and we need to push for more transparency.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so the last question that I had for you was from Squaddy Helen G61. She said, Anne, could you please ask Catherin if she thinks the monarchy will ever be abolished?
I hope so. I hope it will be abolished. I think that there is an argument that it should. I really do. And it is a point in time where the question is not just about how, the transparency and how their public funds are being used, but also, like, it's an existential question. What is the point? What is the point? And people will go back and forth on this forever. But I think, what we have discussed today is that really the point is that it's more about identity and psychology of being British than it is anything practical. There don't appear to me to be any practical reasons why we should have a monarchy. I mean, obviously, society is perfectly capable of operating without one. But where they are operating in this way, and also where they have behaved so appallingly, all of the issues that we've seen, everything that we've talked about with their treatment of Meghan, also their treatment of Diana, but also their engagement of how they protect people who are criminals. If they want to operate like some sort of enterprise, then they should be held accountable. They shouldn't be able to operate in the shadows, which is what they are doing. And we don't have transparency. We don't have clarity. The first step is that we need that. But then the obvious question is, why? Why are they here? What is the point? And in my view, I hold the men to blame who went over to Holland to bring Charles II back in 1660. But we are where we are. So there's
Yeah.
no reason why we should be continuing down this route, and there's no real kind of constitutional or societal purpose to the royal family.
Mm.
So I think they should be abolished.
What circumstances do you think would actually trigger that? Because I'm thinking in, all of the red tape around Parliament, the House of Lords, the House of Commons, what would actually have to happen to even trigger that?
I know, and I think this is often what it comes back to, because if you try and sort of look into it and research, like, so I was trying to look into it. Why is it so complicated for the properties to be kind of made public record? Why is it so difficult? And so then you get into all of the different categories of how they have access to different properties, if they're Crown estate, or if, whatever the circumstances are, if they've inherited them, if they're private properties, if they're linked to their duchies. So it's all red tape. It's just all red tape. And again, it comes back to what I was saying about Marcus Rashford just saying, let's just feed the kids. And then people saying it's way too complicated for, I don't understand. It's not. It really isn't. It doesn't have to be. I mean, I was actually looking at why is it that if you look at the line of succession, the law was passed that it would, after, I think it was the first one, George, after he was born, or before he was born, if he was going to be female, then the female would have been the first in line to succession. So I think that came in 2013. And then I was thinking, well, why doesn't that apply to Charles's generation as well? Because actually Anne is older than Andrew and Edward. So then you'd have to go through the line of succession through William, Harry, their children, and then you'd go to the king's line. But actually Anne would come before Andrew, and that would be highly convenient for them, because Andrew is still actually in the line of succession, even though he's had why don't they do that? And if you look at that, it will say, oh, because then you have to go to the Commonwealth, you have to get agreement from Parliament because it's happened in the past, and it's all very complicated. And you just think, I don't think many people care that much about like whether it's Anne or Anne, like it's not that difficult. So every time you question it and say, look, why can't you just do this? Why can't you just downsize? Oh, because it's far too complicated because of how the duchies work and this works and that works. It doesn't have to be. It really doesn't have to be. And I think that has to come from government, and that will often be driven by an appetite by the population, by the electorate, but it needs to happen because the pressure is building around, why is this so complicated? Why is this so embroidered, like it's so entrenched? Why is it so entrenched? It doesn't have to be that complicated. And government really are the ones that could push for that. I think that it was really telling actually how pretty much the week before Charles took away Prince Andrew's princedom, the week before they were briefing, was it Downing Street or Parliament? They were saying, don't talk about Andrew in Parliament. Don't talk about him. You're not supposed to talk about him. It's none of your business. Don't talk about him. And then a week later, he was gone. Well, not gone, but he had a few titles removed. So that was only because of pressure from people, from the public, saying, hell no, we're not having this. We're not going to listen to this. And so it was important that shows how quickly that changed. It was possible. It was possible for them to do that. At the time, it was too complicated. Don't worry about that. It's too complicated. We can't do that. Oh, okay. Well, that didn't turn out to be true, did it? No. So it is absolutely possible. And the pressure has to come from government. We can't have a government who are being briefed by Buckingham Palace to say, we're not going to talk about this. Yeah. That's what they're here for. That if nothing else, they are here to protect the best interests of the British public. We can see for sure that the royal family aren't about that. Yes. We can see that they are about protecting their own interests and self-preservation. It's that 100%. Simple. Like any sort
100%.
of global corporation, self-preservation. It's not about people. So the pressure
Yeah.
has to come from government, and then that's down to us, which has happened. You know, the example of Virginia Jeffries
Yeah.
is starting to happen. It really is.
Yes. Yes. Well, thank you so much, Catherin, for your insight, your historical
Thank
insight.
you.
Very much appreciated that. Very much appreciate your time. If any of you would like to work with Catherin, she does offer one-on-one feminist coaching. She does also offer online or in person at her London office, and all sorts of resources and tools. If you go to her website or any of her social media, after the podcast, I will put direct links, clickable links, for you to go to. So if you want to work with her, and yes, just thank you so much for your time, Catherin. Thank you, everybody in the
Thank
chat, for
you.
your input as well. I love having conversations like this and kind of going into the depth that we don't often get to, like, on a day-to-day basis, because we're just looking
Yeah,
at the drama.
absolutely.
The
But
drama
this is
or
where it
whatnot.
shows up. This is where it
Yeah.
shows up. And that's where my feminist coaching practice comes in, because it's like, you're not imagining it. Okay.
Yeah.
You're not imagining it. This is what is going on. And so women are experiencing this at a micro level every single day. All of the microaggressions, all the questions about, oh, should you be back at work after having children? Or, you know, it's all of these things every day that women are having to put up with from an intersectional perspective as well. You've got to see, like, the bigger picture of what's going on, because
Yes.
otherwise you just think it's my fault. You
Yes.
internalize it. You think, well, why am I not where I thought I would be by now? Why am I not doing what I want to be
Yeah.
doing? And it's because you're facing these barriers. So the
Yeah.
only way to address it is to be able to go, actually, what's going on here? Do I need
Yeah.
to subscribe to this? No. And so Megan is a good example of that. No, I don't need to
Yes.
subscribe to this. I can do something else. And so it's really important that we
100%.
examine it from a structural perspective and say, look, what's actually going on here? Because
Yes.
it's not just me, this is the wider picture. And
Yes.
actually, what's quite helpful with that as well is, like, what works. So this show works because it raises the platform, it draws attention to it. Actually, like, talking about it, using our voices, that's what works. That's what's always going to work. So it's
Yeah.
how, well, okay, so where do we start? That's the point. And I think that's why, you know, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you today. I've absolutely loved
Thank
it.
you. So have
Yeah,
we.
it's so important what you're doing. And yeah, it's been so interesting to explore it with you. And I hadn't really thought about it that much from the perspective of what's been going on with Megan. But just as you were talking, it really applies to all of the work that I'm doing, what I'm seeing just through looking at patriarchy. That's my starting point. And all roads lead back to Windsor, apparently. Like, it's
Yeah.
always about, where does the monarchy fit in? And that's
Yeah.
what keeps coming up. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Catherin. All right, squaddies. That will be all. I will end the podcast. Appreciate you all so much. And we will catch up tomorrow. Ciao.